I would prefer to be in Sion, but it's difficult. It's the current situation make it not possible. So I will speak about some things that Moise has asked this morning, because this it's something which concern conflict and complementarities between tourists, and inhabitants. So I will, in a first part, present that, as you know, tourism is an activity which implies mobilities towards touristic places, and by this mobility, tourism is generating economic activity, wealth, and jobs, and we will see that in the second part. But with this mobility and the co-presence of inhabitants and tourists, tourism can also be a source of trouble for inhabitants and territories. So we will see in the conclusion how to maximize positive impact of tourism and minimize negative impact. And we will see that it is linked to, of course, regulation, because regulation is important for fighting against mass tourism. But it's also an issue of innovation. So the first part is tourism, that is an activity which implies mobility. Oh, I'm sure that you know this picture from the World Tourism Organization. And as you know, according to this World Tourism Organization, the number of international tourist arrivals worldwide is expected to reach 1.8 billion by the year 2030. And as you know, also the growth has been more important in 2019 than it has been expected. But of course, in 2020, the picture is very different due to the pandemic. But just this picture to show that 1.8 billion of international arrivals, it's numerous people, many people. It's around 1.3 times the expected Chinese population in 2030. And at this international tourists, we must add the domestic tourists. Domestic tourists, which is very difficult to calculate according to the country, but at the world scale, we can say that it's about 5 or 6 billion of domestic tourists. So it's many people. But also, tourism is concentrated in some countries, and inside the countries, in some places, in some cities, in some territories. On this slide, you have a picture which has been made by Christophe Terrier, which is a statistical researcher, who was a statistical researcher. And you can see the blue line. The blue line is the inhabitant of the Alpes-Maritimes department. And the dot, blue line, is the average population who is in the department. As you can see on this slide, the average population who is in the department is around 8.5% higher than the population who is living in the department. So there is many people linked to tourism. Another picture. It's anamorphose. I don't know the word in English, so it's map with it, which is changing with time. And you can see on this map France and the everyday population of French department. And as you can see on this slide, the everyday population of the department is changing according to the presence of tourists. As you can see, during summer, there is many people in the south of France and around the sea. But in the time of winter, there is more people, more tourists in the department which are where there is many mountains and so on. So tourism, by definition, implies mobility. But this mobility is the source of job, of income, of wealth in territories, but also a source of trouble. As you know, tourism is generating wealth. For instance, I think that you know, it's about 1 out of every 2 jobs in the world. It's about 10% of the GDP in the world. It's about 7% of the world exports. It's many jobs. It can induce economic growth. Sometimes it can induce development, but this issue is debated. Of course, there is some debates about the link between tourism and development. So tourism is very important, even if it's very difficult to measure the tourism activity. So some country which are very dependent which depend on tourism. The top 5 countries in 2017 was Malta, about 15% of the GDP. Croatia, about 15% too, Thailand, and so on. But tourism is a very important activity, and for countries, but also for some cities. You have on the picture on the slide the picture of Macau, because for Macau tourism represents about 50% of GDP. So it's very, very important. Furthermore, about 37% of Cancun residents are employed in the tourist trade. So in Cancun, it's also very, very important. So what can we say about, from a theoretical point of view, about tourism? We can mobilize the Bayes theory. I don't know if you know this theory. It's a Keynesian analysis. In this analysis, which has been developed by Homer Hoyt in 1954, the exportation are an engine of regional growth. Why? Because regions are too small to be autonomous. They depend on the exportation, the markets, the international market. So the base of this theory is to distinguish regional activities between basic activities which are producing goods which can be exported, and non-basic activities devoted to local consumption. The main idea is that the external demand, that is the demand for exportation, yes, the external demand imply a multiplicator effect on the regional income. And you have the formula on the slide. That is, a change in income is a multiplicator of the change of exportation, where, say, E is the local propension to consumption in the region E, and M E, the local propensity to import goods and service in the region E. That is the old base theory. This old base theory has present many difficulties, or it's very difficult to identify the export activity. What is the export base? How to identify? How to measure it? Moreover, the income growth due to exportation can induce a growth in the proportion to import some goods. So the income flow enter in the region, but after that, by importation, the income go outside the region. Moreover, exportation can induce a dependency, as it is the case for all sectors. When a country or a region is depending on a sole sector, it can generate a dependency. Moreover, there are other relationships with the foreign economy, for instance, money transfer and so on. And more important things, there are also other factors, that is internal ones, that can impact the growth of the region. And these internal factors are, for instance, entrepreneurship, for instance, the supply capacity, how the supply capacity is, if are the businessmen innovating and so on, and also the public spending are also an element which can influence the regional growth. But more important for our issue here is the revenue-based theory. The revenue-based theory, the main idea, the main thing is that we can see a disconnection between productive places and consumption places. Incomes are produced in productive places, but income are consumed in other places. So there is a difference between productive places and consumption places. And there are income flows coming in territories without productive capacity. And the analysis is based on the distinction of two kinds of base: the productive economic base, that is the incomes from exportation. It's an old base theory. But there is also a non-productive base. And what is the non-productive base? The non-productive base is the public base, that is the salaries of civil servants, but also the social base, that is, for instance, federal transfer revenue, reimbursement of medical expenses. But more important for our issue is residential and touristic base. What is this base? It's the base, it is the income which are coming from tourists, and also the income which are spending in the place, but which have been created in productive places. Do you understand what I mean? So there is two kind of base, productive economic base and a non-productive base. And inside this non-productive base, there is the residential and touristic base. So tourism, it's an activity which we have seen before, which imply mobility. And with mobility and people, there is also incomes. So tourism activity induce flows of incomes in territory. So income coming from external sources, because the income of tourists have been created elsewhere. And this income will circulate in the place. And if we can maximize the local proportion of consumption, there will be a multiplicator effect on domestic activities. That is, the income can create new income in the places. New income in the places, that is new economic activities, that is new jobs, that is wealth, and so on. So tourism can be considered as an activity which can induce a better growth in a place if we adopt this bad theory. On this slide, you have the map of France, and you can see the percent of expenses linked to tourism in basic income by employment zone in 2012. As you can see, this percent is high in some places, and especially on around the sea. As you can see, the color is I did not remember the name, pink, but more pink. So the color is more pink. So you can see the zone, the employment zone where the expense link. The expenses linked to tourists are highest. So these places are very depend on tourism for income and for jobs. So, but tourism is also a trouble for inhabitants and territories. There is a lot of information on this on the media. As you can see, for instance, La Ramblas in Barcelona, there is too many people. It's overcrowding. You can see on this slide, tourism. It's the main problem in Barcelona, according to the inhabitants. Oh, it's not tourism, it's an invasion. So tourism may induce some trouble for inhabitants. Oh, another example. It's a contestation of tourism and tourists. Some inhabitants of Catalonia say, no, don't say our city is nice. Don't say that, because if you say that, there is too much tourists. We will come. So don't say, and they give a paper to the tourists, and they say, don't say that it was a great travel, because if you say that, too much tourists will come in Barcelona. Oh, another example. As you can see, the big boat in Venice. Yes, it's a problem for the monuments. It's a problem for heritage. Oh, another example: the Fountain Trevi in Roma. You see the tourists who are here, and of course, sometimes the tourists want to take a bath in the fountain. So it's a problem for inhabitants, because it's a cultural fountain, and it's not a fountain to take a bath. What is important? Oh, another example is a crowd of tourists near San Marco Square in Venice. So there is too much tourists. And what is important, that this fight against tourism is also present in medium cities, in other cities, is in less touristic cities. For instance, this picture was taken in Lyon, where the European Regional Science Association Congress last summer was held. And in a part of the Lion city, there is an old part of the Lion. And sometimes inhabitants consider that there is too much tourists. So tourism, it's a trouble. It can be strange to speak about over tourism today, because today, I will come back to this. Today there is not over tourism because there is no more tourism. So, but over tourism, I think it's also a source of trouble for the inhabitant and for territory. Over tourism is also in Latin America. Yeah, as you can see in the Machu Picchu. Yeah, over tourism endangers the heritage, the monuments, because too much tourists, which can destroy the heritage. The China Wall. Do you see the China Wall? Do you want to go there? No, I think it's a little bit crowded, yes? But this crowd can destroy the wall. Oh, another picture, la Côte d'Azur, but in China. So there is too much tourist. The tourist is also a source of trouble for people. It's also a source of pollution. What is it? It is Mount Everest. Yes, the higher mountain in the world. And as you can see, the long queue of mountain climbers line a path on this mount. But it's also very dangerous because there is some risk for the climbers. Yeah. So, what can we say about that? We have seen before that tourism is an activity which induces income flows, which induces wealth, which induces jobs. But there is a competition between different activities. There is competition between different activities because they use common resources. These activities are using land. These activities sometimes are using sea, are using water. And tourism is also using these common resources. So tourism can endanger other activity as agriculture, fish industry, or these activities are not mobile. There is also a competition between commercial and service activities for inhabitants and for tourists. For instance, in some cities you can find many shops for tourists, but sometimes there is no more shops for inhabitants. Our inhabitants require some shop to buy the good they need. So it's a competition between tourism activity and commercial activity for inhabitants. It is the same for public services. Why? But because public services are for inhabitants and not for tourists. So sometimes there is no more public education school for inhabitants, for children, because there is just a little part of the population who are inhabitants. So the second issue concerning tourism is also the issue of real estate. I will come back later to this issue. There is also an issue of negative externalities which are produced by tourism. Tourism is producing negative externalities in terms of transportation, of course, but also in terms of due to the presence of tourists in the city. There is some negative externality in terms of pollution. Tourism can also induce a denaturalization of natural milieux by overbuilding of coastal or mountain areas. In Switzerland, there is a lot of second home which have been built, and sometimes it's also a problem for the landscape. Over-tourism is also destroying material heritage, as we have seen in the picture before. And more also important, tourism is destroying the immaterial heritage, because the tourists import with them culture, other tradition, or bad behavior. And the cultural and the popular tradition in the country is not respected. For instance, as I said before, the tourists who want to take a bath in the Fontaine Trevi in Roma, it's bad behavior. It is against the tradition of the place. This youth conflict also are present in the field of real estate, with what we call closed shutters. That is, there is nobody in the low season. There is nobody in the low season, and the shutters are closed. There is also the conflict linked to the co-present in the field of real estate because of sales of real estate for tourists and for second home, or real estate temporary rentings. So there is a decrease in available real estate for people, for renting or for sale. There is an increase of real estate prices for renting or for sales. So there are some difficulties of recruitment for the enterprise who want to recruit some people, but enterprise don't want to locate in the territory due to the price of real estate for their employees. So tourism can induce some trouble for other economic activities and for business, other business activities. There is also some political conflict in terms of public decision. The main need is to know what will we renew? Do we choose to renew the touristic places, that is historical centers for tourists, or do we renew the suburbs? Of course, there is some out of the beaten track tourism in the suburbs, but it's a very small part of tourism. Mass tourism is not tourism out of the beaten tracks. Mass tourism want to go to the historical center. They want to go to Montmartre. They want to go to Eiffel. They want to go to Louvre, and so on. So there is some political conflict in terms of public decision. What we want to renew for inhabitants The place where there are inhabitants, or the place where tourists come. And we can see that tourism, sorry, there is a mistake. Tourism is always the activity which attracts capital, business initiative, and which has a dominant position. So it's difficult for other activity and for inhabitants. Tourism question the territory organization and the political organization of the territory, because we must choose between different type of activity, between different type of people who want to attract inhabitants or to attract tourists. Well, I don't know how many time I have some time, so I arrived to my conclusion.
Yeah, you still have 10 good minutes.
Okay,
Marie.
So thanks. As we have seen in this presentation, tourists and inhabitants are in the same time complementary, but also in conflict. Tourism is required for money, for job to inhabitants, but inhabitants must also be preserved. Inhabitants must, it's important that there is also inhabitant in the city, inhabitant in the places. But if there is too important conflict, tourists should not come back. So we must take into account this conflict before they appear. Of course, the current time with the pandemics shows that if tourists don't come, it's a real difficulty for numerous territories and jobs. I will come back to this. The tourism activity is the activity which has been the more impacted by the pandemic, because the flow of people have stopped. So it's important to think about innovation and regulation to produce more sustainable tourism, but a sustainable tourism in terms of a long-time tourism, which can be a tool for growth and development for inhabitants. So the sustainability of tourism requires to limit the number of tourists who are in the same place at the same time. There is a different solution for this. We can produce mandatory circuits to visit the city and to organize flow. We can forbid access when too much tourists. We can also choose what type of tourists to welcome. For instance, in Paris, there is today a current analysis about the advertising policy of the city. They say that they don't want more Chinese tourists, because before the pandemic, they say that they didn't want no more Chinese groups. Why? Because it's too much people in the same place at the same time. So they want to make a different advertising policy toward individual tourists and no more group tourists. Another possibility is, of course, to charging tourists, but it's a discrimination between tourists who have money and between tourists who have less money. It's also possible to introduce a compulsory reservation in museums, in monuments, in places to visit. It's also possible to extend tourism in the time and extend tourism in the low season. sometimes in the different days of the week, and not only on Saturday and Sunday. And of course, it is possible to expand tourism by organizing events during the low season. Moreover, to make that tourists are more diffuse in the city, it is possible to enlarge the heritageization process to new resources in less touristic place. As Maria Gravari Barba said, tourism is an heritage producing machine. So in a time where all is heritage, everything can be heritages. We can buy creative tools. We need tourism resources, which are less known. For instance, culinary discovery. For instance, it's known street art. But these new circuits, new creative circuits, new resources are used to fight against massification of tourism, which is a real problem. Moreover, we can use internet and the digital to produce digital innovation. Digital innovation can be used to produce real-time information to indicate gems for the tourists, but also for the inhabitants, to create waiting lists for visiting the monument, the places. And lastly, digital innovation can be used to develop M-tourism in the touristic places. We can develop, and there is sometimes some application of augmented reality to visit places without entering into the monument. I hope it will work. You can see it's in Épernay. Épernay, it is a town where we produce champagne, and it's the main avenue in Épernay. And we can, with your smartphone, be in front of a monument. You can go above the monument, but more important, you can go inside the monument to see the champagne cellar. So if you don't go inside the monument, you don't destroy this monument. Oh, I don't know. Come back to the. I don't know how to come back to my PowerPoint.
I think you have to quit. Il faut que tu quittes le plein écran.
Okay. Okay. So the last thing I want to say is that the sustainability of tourism requires to develop complementarities between tourists and inhabitants. How to develop complementarities between tourists and inhabitants? It's possible by favoring the interaction between them. Not interaction in terms of conflict, of course, but interaction which are I don't know, which are desired, by enhancing the know-how, the culture of the inhabitant, to make a different tourism. It's also possible to increase the cooperation between public and private stakeholders by taking into account the inhabitants' willingness. That is, the inhabitants are also the main element in a tourism city, because they can improve the city attractiveness for tourists. And moreover, we can see that if we analyze tourism, as I said, tourism could become a tool for developing local projects, in tourism, of course, but also beyond tourism, because tourism is creating cooperation between public and private stakeholders, between these stakeholders and the inhabitants. So, of course, today it's strange to speak about over tourism and overcrowding, because there is no more tourists. There is no more tourists, as you say, as you see on this slide, the coronavirus on the beach. There is no more tourism. Another picture, that is the Louvre in Paris. The picture has been taken during the April month. There is no tourist. There is no tourist, and it is also a big problem for Paris, for the economic activity in Paris, because, for instance, the sector of hotel and restaurant, the value added has decreased of 80% in Paris. So the money is not coming in Paris, and the jobs are not possible to make a tourism activity. So the pandemic shows that tourism is important for the economic activity. But the pandemic can also be used as a tool to rethink, to think differently tourism, to produce a new tourism which is more, which is good for inhabitants, which is good for environment, and not only for money. Many thanks for your kind attention, and sorry for my English speaking, which is
Thank you very much, Marie, for this